Hey guys, back again with a new video. Games I've played recently video. I've been playing quite a few games. Don't really want to do a review for each one. One of the games is going to take up the most time here because I did actually finish it, and I wanted to talk about it here instead of doing a full review on it. But yeah, let's get started with the game you're seeing here, Transformers Devastation on the PS4. This was a PS Plus game. I think it still is a PS Plus game for October. And I'm glad it did come to PS Plus because it's always one of those games I wanted to pay, or play rather, but didn't want to pay a whole lot for it. I'm not crazy about Transformers. I don't know much about it. I had like a few Beast Wars toys back in the day, I remember, but I didn't grow up with Transformers. I wasn't like an '80s kid, so it doesn't. I don't have any nostalgic attachment towards it. The Michael Bay movies obviously are garbage. I've only seen like the first two of those, and I was done. But I think even Transformers fans hate those. Haven't seen the '80s movie that I know a lot of people still kind of like, although I've heard some negative things about it too. But yeah, this game being a platinum game was enough for me to want to play it. And the reviews upon release were good. It was a short game, but it wasn't a full-priced game, if I can remember. I think a lot of the negative aspects of it had to do with how short it was, and it is a short game. It took me no longer than 4 hours to get through it, but it's a nice game on PS Plus. If you have PS Plus, I definitely recommend this. It's fun. It's extremely fun. Now, the combat system in it is not as in-depth as Bayonetta, but you still do have some things like the dodge roll that was in that game. I think like they called it witch time in Bayonetta, and it works pretty much the same here, where if you dodge an enemy attack at the right time, it kind of becomes slow motion for a little bit, and you get a lot of extra hits in, and there's like counter attacks like that. The main hook with this game with the combat is the ability to transform between the vehicle mode and then like the mech mode. The combat, when you're just like constantly switching between these modes and pulling off all these insane combos, and all of it looks super flashy, the animations are great. The combat just feels good. It has like this great punch to it. There's a lot of different combos. You can really master this combo system like with a lot of Platinum games and eventually get quite good at it. There's some moves that you have to buy in a shop, which is a bit lame. Like that's one of those things that Platinum likes to do. Although, unlike Wonderful 101, I wouldn't say a lot of those moves in the shop are essential, so it's not as big of a problem as it is within that game. The story here, I didn't even know what the hell was going on. I can't say I was too invested in the story. Now, Transformers fans are probably going to really like this. I think they get a lot of like the classic voice actors for a lot of this. And you'll see a lot of like fan favorite kind of characters in this as well. So honestly, Transformers fans probably have already played this, I have to imagine. But if you are a Transformers fan and you haven't played this, I mean, do yourself a favor and definitely try to get this. I mean, even without PS Plus, I think this game is pretty cheap. I don't think it costs a whole lot nowadays. The soundtrack is actually really kick-ass in this game. It's like this really like heavy metal soundtrack with like these super fast drums. And super crazy guitar solos and shit like that. It really fits like the game and the action. The only thing about the gameplay I'm not crazy about, you have like some mini games throughout the levels. Like most of the game takes place in one city, like the city environment you're seeing now. But later in the game, you do see a few new environments. You'll get a few challenges as you go around the environments, but it's kind of like a point A to point B kind of map. But it's not totally linear. You can kind of go off the beaten path and find like bonus objectives and get hidden items and things like that. There's a few, they spice up the gameplay in a few different ways. There's like some racing sections where you're kind of racing on a track and like killing enemies and kind of fighting a boss as you're racing, which I thought were actually kind of cool. There's a few turret sequences, which I usually hate those, but I actually didn't mind them in this game. I thought it was a nice break from all the melee combat that this game's got. There is actually ranged combat in this game too, where you can equip guns, and that doesn't fare as well as the melee combat. It's pretty simplistic, but it can be useful, especially if you have some really powerful weaponry. And this game actually has a loot system and some RPG elements, some like light RPG elements, where you're kind of upgrading your character. The more you fight, you kind of level up and your stats increase. You can actually get to a shop that you can use money on to kind of upgrade your weapons and kind of like synthesize weapons, like combine them together to make stronger ones. Each weapon has its own level. That stuff, I don't know. I don't want to say it's implemented poorly, but I don't feel like it had a major impact on like the damage I was doing. Um, but maybe on the higher difficulties, honestly, it might be actually kind of annoying on the higher difficulties, where if you don't have powerful enough weapons, it will take forever to kill the enemies, and if you don't have the proper like gem type things equipped to your character, you might take too much damage. I don't know. I haven't tried the higher difficulties to see if that actually impacts the game in a negative way, but I can't say I was thrilled about the RPG elements. Going through the menus takes a long time, and a lot of the times I just wanted to be out of like the shop area and just be back into the action. So I don't know. I don't know if I like that stuff too much. But yeah, what else? There's kind of like a crazy like superpower type thing you can do if you press the left and right analog sticks at the same time, which is pretty cool. It's just a really fun, kind of simplistic game. Like the combat system is not like super complex or anything, but it's fun for like the 4 hours that the game lasts. It's got that typical ranking system too that's in a lot of Platinum games. It's actually kind of a shame that the Ninja Turtles game turned out to be garbage. While this is really good because I have far more nostalgic attachment towards the Ninja Turtles. If that game was as good as this, it would have been awesome. Although I honestly think the multiplayer focus of that game is actually one of the things that kind of made it weaker. Even though I haven't really played it, this is a single player game. There's no multiplayer in this, but yeah, Transformers Devastation. Really enjoyed it. Definitely, if you can get it for cheap, or if you have PS Plus, definitely play it. I think you'll have a good time with it. And you don't, like with me, you don't need to be a Transformers fan to enjoy this. You really don't. It's just a damn fun action game. The next game is also a PS Plus game called Actual Sunlight, and this is on the PlayStation Vita. And this is another game I would recommend. It's a short indie visual novel game. This isn't going to take you anywhere over an hour to complete. And I thought this was a bizarrely relatable game for me. It deals with pretty harsh, dark subject matter. Basically, the main character in this, his name's Evan Winter, and he lives in Toronto, which is pretty funny. And he's dealing with depression. And it's basically just like a personal journey with this character involving the depression, kind of like a day in the life type experience. But it gets really dark towards the end. There's a lot of dialogue here. It's basically like you walk around like these environments. It almost looks like it was made in RPG Maker. I don't think it was, but it's got that look to it. But basically, it's a very dialogue-driven game. You get like these dialogue sequences that you're seeing here. There's a little character interaction, but there's not too much. There's no gameplay to speak of. It's definitely a visual novel. But I think it was honestly, I think the game is really well written, and it tackles the subject matter in a realistic manner. And I really appreciated that. I think it's worth experiencing whether you deal with depression or similar feelings or not. I think it makes you think. It definitely asks some interesting questions. I actually really enjoyed this. I thought it was a nice experience. Now, some people are probably going to hate it, and I've heard a lot of people saying that it could trigger a lot of people with like really with like suicidal thoughts or things like that. I'm not sure. Maybe it goes to some really dark places, but and if you don't think you can handle it, I would maybe not recommend playing it. But yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, I think for this short, free hour-long experience on PlayStation Plus, it's definitely worth checking out. So yeah, a pleasant surprise, I think. And yet another PS Plus game, also on the Vita, Code Realize Guardian of Rebirth. I think that's what it's called. And I had heard good things about this game, even though it is an Otome game. And for those of you that don't know what that is, I didn't know what it was for quite a long time. I just recently discovered what these types of games were. And there's a shit ton of them on the Vita. a ton of them in Japan as well. I think there's a lot of them on PC as well. And they're basically like I don't know. They're kind of dating games, sort of, where you play as a girl and all of the romantic interest characters are guys. So it's basically a girl game. That's basically what an otome is. And this one, from what I heard, was more story driven than a lot of them, and the dating elements were kind of scaled down. That wasn't really much of a focus. It was more on like the characters, the character building and the world building. So I was kind of interested in this one. I still was hesitant. I mean, I still had a feeling I wasn't going to enjoy it, and like these types of games would just not be my thing. And playing it made me realize that maybe visual novels, at least ones without gameplay, aren't quite my thing. I mean, I enjoyed actual sunlight quite a bit, but it was like this really short hour-long experience where this game is like, I think like 20 hours or something like that with like multiple endings. But I have liked visual novels when they've got interesting gameplay twists to them, or like a really dark, involving story, like the Danganronpa games or the or the Zero Escape trilogy, rather. But this one is more lighthearted. It's got some serious moments from what I've played. Now, I didn't finish this game. I put in maybe like, I don't know, 6 hours or something like that. I didn't care for it, to be honest. It gets a lot of praise, but I don't know. It just didn't do it. It didn't do anything for me. Now, I don't hate this as much as Steins Gate. Like Steins Gate, I absolutely fucking hated because the characters in this, I gotta say, I didn't hate them. I found them uninteresting. The main, I guess, the story with this game, you're this girl that's kind of like trapped in this mansion, and she's kind of stuck there because she's got like this poison in her, and anything she touches basically dies. But you're kind of trapped in this mansion by your father. But this character comes and kind of rescues you. I think his name is Lupin. And from there, you kind of get swept up in this like crazy plot, and then obviously trying to figure out like who your dad was, and how you got this poison like in you. I don't know. The story from like the 6 hours I played, it never got interesting. It never picked up. I've heard it does pick up eventually, but I don't know. If the game doesn't do anything for me in the first 6 hours, I'm probably not going to be continuing with it. And the characters just, I don't know, they just weren't doing anything for me. Now, a lot of the characters in this game, I guess the big hook is that they're based on like classic literature characters. The game's got like this kind of like, I forget what year it takes place in, but it's like this old style steampunk setting. But honestly, I didn't find it that interesting. And there's just so much dialogue, and a lot of it is just so like a lot of it feels just unnecessary. Like all this dialogue, it's like the same problem I have with Steins Gate. Like all this dialogue and not enough. Like, and it just is not like it's hard to explain, but it doesn't. It's not pulling you through quick enough. Like I feel like you can get to the point of a story and like the world and characters without this much dialogue. I just don't think you need this much fucking dialogue. But yeah, there's like a glossary that lets you know like certain terms if you're kind of unfamiliar with them. From what I understand, there's like very minor choices in this game. I only saw a few of them where you pick like one of two or three choices, and you can get kind of like different character endings because again, the otome elements come in because there's all these male characters, and I guess by the end of the game, you like have a romantic connection, I guess, with one of these characters. Like that whole aspect of it, I didn't get too far into that, but that's like the part that doesn't interest me whatsoever. But yeah, I don't know. This game, yeah, I didn't care for it. I thought it was really dull and really slow paced. Now, I would still say give it a shot. I mean, it's on PS Plus, it's free, and who knows, maybe this might be your thing. But I don't know. I don't know. I didn't care for it, but hey, I didn't hate it as much as Steins Gate. I mean, the characters here didn't make me want to fucking punch something. But anyways, that's Code Realize. Okay, and finally, the game that I finished, and I'm going to talk about the most in this video. Although I'm going to try not to make this video too long. But Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse on the 3DS. Now, Shin Megami Tensei 4, if you've watched my videos for a while, you'll know that was my game of the year of 2012, 2013, whatever the year that came out. I fucking loved that game. Now, it had problems, and I actually probably think a little less of it, actually, now that I've played this game, and honestly, like a few years after I finished it. The story in that game was fairly uninteresting. The characters were basically like wooden, like they were extremely dull and like stoic to a fault, I think. And that's actually one of the big improvements with Apocalypse. But anyways, I was really excited for this game. I was really looking forward to it. And now that I finished it, it took me 50 hours. This game is extremely long, too long if you're going for the neutral path. If you're going for the good or evil paths, this game's probably only going to take you around 35 to 40 hours. But yeah, what do I think of it? It's good. I think this game is good and it's enjoyable for the most part. Now, I would not recommend this for people that thought SMT4 was okay or merely good. I would only recommend this to people that loved that game, like me, and want more, basically, because this game has a lot of flaws. This game, well, maybe not a lot of flaws, but the one part of this game is so bad it drags down the game quite a bit. We'll get to that, but we'll talk improvements. First, I do want to say that it's a very familiar experience if you played SMT4. This game reuses the exact same environments, and before I talk too much about this, I do want to say this is not going to spoil the events of SMT4, so don't worry about that if you haven't played that game. But this game takes place in the same environments as that game, a lot of the same dungeons even. There are some new locations, but you're mostly going through the same areas, fighting the same demons, meeting and interacting with a lot of the same characters, and it does feel familiar a lot of the times. It feels like deja vu. There's a lot of asset reuse, and that's one of the things that's a bit of a bummer about the game. But at the same time, it makes sense because this is a side story of the game. Like, it's not a full-out sequel because it kind of takes place around the same time as some of the events of the neutral path of SMT4. So it is kind of like this side game companion to that game. So I guess it makes sense that there's reused assets and reused environments, but it does, I gotta say, at times I was really feeling the deja vu, and I was like, been there, done this. But as for improvements, this game has made a lot of ease of use improvements over SMT4. For one, the world map. They still use the same world map where it's kind of like this overhead view, and you're walking around as this like little cone. And the enemies are kind of like circles, and then you go into the bigger environments from there. And in the original game, it was kind of obtuse, and it was hard to find where you had to go a lot of the times. I've never actually hated this world map. I really don't mind it all that much. But in this game, they give you markers now for your main objective, so you're not going to get lost all that much. I do wish they added them for the side quests in this game, because a lot of the directions for the side quests are extremely vague, and I was wandering around aimlessly for a lot of them. And sometimes I would just look at a quest, and if it wasn't giving me proper directions, I would just skip it. So that was kind of frustrating. I wish they went a little bit further with that improvement. The battle system is generally the same great press turn system. There's a few different things. Now, I think the smirk mechanic was in SMT4, but it behaves a little differently here, where sometimes your characters will get a smirk, and basically that will make them always critical, and I think that their weaknesses get nullified for like a turn, which is like this cool mechanic. But like the light and dark attacks in this game, like the Mudo and the Hama attacks, they'll basically be an instant kill if you're in smirk mode and you use them, which I thought was a good way of handling those types of moves. And the enemies can smirk as well, so you've got to be careful with that. The battle system has a lot of strategy to it, like before. You've still got the demon recruiting. One of the improvements is with like the demon recruiting. Now, this is one of those things where the more I play SMT games, the more I hate this mechanic. I really wish Atlas would just do away with it or streamline it in a way where it's actually fun. But it's still random as fuck. It's still really frustrating when they take all your items and just run away on you. But they have improved it in some ways. For instance, if you find a demon and you keep trying to recruit them and they keep running away or stealing your shit, eventually when you find them again and talk to them, they'll mention that they have a history with you and they kind of like you, and then they'll just join you automatically. So that I thought was kind of cool. If you try to recruit a demon that's too high level, he's over your level, he'll get one of his friends to join you instead, which again, I like that. But it's still a bit too random and RNG based for my tastes, and very frustrating at times. I really wish that stuff was kind of handled better. What else for improvements? There's also an affinity system in this game where demons will have different affinities. They might be especially weak to fire attacks, but super strong with ice attacks. And you'll see little numbers beside the abilities. So like Bufadine +5, which would mean that their ice attacks are extremely powerful. But they might have debuffs at the bottom on their character screen where they might say like -5 for fire, which means fire is going to do and especially a large amount of damage to them. And their fire attacks that they do have will be weak. So that adds a lot of strategy with the demon fusing in this game. I feel like I put a lot more thought into how I fuse my demons together based on these buffs and debuffs on the different demons. So I thought the affinity system was actually handled quite well. And I think that's one of the enjoyable additions to like the battle system in this game. Other than that, though, this game plays very similarly to SMT4. There's not a whole lot different here. But like I said, there are those kind of ease of use type things. But by far the biggest improvement with this game is not necessarily the story. I think the story is honestly kind of as uninteresting as in SMT4. It's kind of like a generic angels versus demons save the world plot. Like, I don't know, I never found myself totally engaged. Although there are a few moments that are pretty good, and I think the ending is good, at least on the neutral path. But, well, actually the other endings from what I saw were kind of neat as well. But the characters are the biggest improvement with this game. The characters in SMT4, I really didn't care for them. They were, like I said before, really wooden characters. The characters in this game have a lot of personality to them. This game has more of a sense of humor with its characters as well. They have more of like a backstory, and they have more growth. One of the characters in this reminded me of like Luke from Tales of the Abyss, a character that you start off hating, and by the end of the game you really like him. It was really impressive. I was honestly quite impressed that the characters in this game I really liked. The only character I guess I wasn't crazy about is the main character, but there is a little interesting twist with him, and how he kind of relates to the story I thought was really interesting as well. And I guess this is not spoilers for the story, but within like the first 5 minutes your character actually dies. You get resurrected by this demon named Dogda, and he kind of has you do what he wants you to do in exchange for your life. And this character, Dogda, is fucking awesome. I love this character. And a big part of it is the voice acting, which the voice acting in this game, like with a lot of Atlas games, is top-notch. But the voice actor for Dogda, he's got kind of like I think it's like an Irish accent. I could be wrong on that, but it's like this really badass Irish accent that I really loved, and I think it really added to his character. He's a very mysterious, kind of a dark, not quite sadistic character, but I don't know. I don't really want to spoil his character too much, but I really enjoyed his character. It's like one of the best parts of the game for me, along with all the other characters. So that was a big step up over SMT4, by far the biggest. But unfortunately now we gotta go to the negatives. I mean, I still really like the battle system in this game. I like the gameplay. Most of the dungeons I like. I think they're slightly maze-like, but they're not too bad. I love how you see your character in third person. The mapping feature is great, how it maps out everything for you. I love how if you buy different armors, it changes the look of your character. I've always loved that in RPGs. Again, the setting is really interesting. This really dark, desolate version of Tokyo is really cool to explore, although, that's all obviously a strength carried over from SMT4. But yeah, we got to talk about the negatives here and why I think it's merely a good game instead of a great or amazing game. And this is a shame, because if it wasn't for this shit, it might be one of my favorite games of the year. But basically, if you're going to play this game, don't bother with the neutral route. Go with the chaos or the good routes, because on the normal difficulty, this game's quite challenging. It ramps up nicely compared to SMT4, which was too hard in the beginning, and then it got too easy towards the end. This game, it's a more balanced challenge, and it's harder overall, but it didn't feel unfair at any point. It didn't feel like it was too much. And I really enjoyed that, and I was able to, get up to the chaos and good endings and finish them, and I was satisfied. But the neutral ending of this game, it's like this 10-hour epilogue, basically. And this, I swear this was designed for like SMT veterans and people that missed the hardcore challenge of the old games, and they missed the extreme maze-like environments of the previous game. Now, one of the dungeons, the dungeon that I hated the most in this game, aside from like the final dungeon, actually came before the neutral path. And it's probably one of the worst parts of the game. It's this giant maze with all these elevators and doors and multiple floors. And I got lost in this place, and I was kind of ranting on Twitter about this, but I was almost ready to fucking give up. Like, it was so fucking irritating. But eventually I was just like, you know what, I'll suck it up. I'll go on YouTube and watch a playthrough of it to get through this damn dungeon. And eventually I did. And the dungeon itself is short. It's just so super easy to get lost. But back to the neutral path. This is when the difficulty of this game jumps to absurd levels. Like, it's insane. I actually had to drop to easy mode. And it's weird. Easy mode in this game is actually too easy. But the final boss in this game was rough. Like, I was almost max level at the end of this game. 99 is the max level. And I've heard on the higher difficulties, people do reach the level cap before even getting to the final boss. Which kind of sucks, because you're wandering around this final dungeon. You can't level up at all. But there is DLC that you can get, free DLC that kind of breaks the level cap, and I think that came out in October. That wasn't there at release, but I would recommend downloading that DLC. But anyways, what was I saying? Yeah, the difficulty of this of the neutral route just ratchets things up to such a ridiculous degree. It gets really frustrating, and honestly, in my opinion, it gets downright cheap, where all the bosses basically are able to pierce through your resistances. And if you use like reflecting powers, they'll immediately counter that with abilities that break your barriers. And basically, any type of strategy you come up with, these bosses are designed to completely counter them. Like, honestly, I feel like there was nothing I could do in these bosses other than get lucky and hope that they don't just fucking wipe out my party. And the amount of damage that these bosses did in the neutral route was insane. Like, I would get into these bosses, and I checked on the internet, I wasn't even under-leveled or anything like that. Like, I had good demons that were really powerful, great abilities, and I would get to these bosses, and they would immediately start off this chain of attacks that would wipe out my party almost instantly. And it was just, eventually I would beat these bosses after trial and error, but eventually I got towards the end, and there's this one boss that just, I couldn't beat him. I spent I don't know, like more than 10 tries fighting this guy. I grinded a bunch, got up a bunch of strong demons. I tried fucking everything, and I could not beat him. He just simply did too much damage and would like basically counteract all of my strategies. Like, the big thing with the SMT games is kind of creating demons for the best situations. Demons that will repel physical attacks if you're on a boss that's really strong against physical attacks. Fusing demons that have the proper resistances. But that all flies out the window with these bosses. It was totally unfair, honestly. And like, every boss was just a complete chore that eventually I was just like, fuck it, I'm dropping to easy mode. Like, this is ridiculous. So I did that, and then the game was too easy for the rest of it. Now, the normal encounters in this game actually aren't too bad. I think the difficulty's fine for them. It's the bosses where the game just gets absolutely insane, but that's not the big problem with the neutral path. It's the padding. This game is padded as fuck. The neutral path, basically the story almost disappears for most of it, and you basically go through these two dungeons, and for a combined total of you're probably spending about 6 hours in these two dungeons. And they're these long multi-floor dungeons. The first one isn't too bad, it's kind of linear, but there's a bunch of bosses, and it felt like the final dungeon. But of course, no, it just goes on forever after that. I do have to mention, too, there's a lot of parts in this game where you have to fight like 2 or 3 bosses, super difficult bosses, in a row with no recovery in between, which is insane. especially the neutral path killing. Like you have to basically kill the chaos and law path bosses one right after the other. That was pretty fucking brutal. But yeah, these dungeons. I want to talk about the final dungeon because this final dungeon is just an exercise in tedium and frustration and boredom. This is like this multi-floor dungeon with all these warp points, all these multiple dead ends. Everything looks the same. There's these teleporters all over the place, and it's just it's so easy to get lost in this place, and it just goes on forever. It never fucking ends. It's actually not as bad as the dungeon I was talking about earlier, because if you actually look at the map and you keep mapping out areas you've not been to, and you kind of make sure you try to always go through teleporters and doors that you haven't been through before, you'll eventually make it to the exit, and you can kind of unlock these warp points to kind of warp between floors, which is handy. But this dungeon just goes on for fucking ever, and you can't recruit new demons in it. The demons that you fight, if you try to talk to them, for some arbitrary reason, it just says, no, you can't recruit these demons. So that was kind of bullshit as well. One thing I do like with this game, though, because of Dagda, when you die, you can immediately continue, and you basically pick up where you left off. Now, some people, I think, are going to hate this and feel like it removes a lot of the challenge. For me, I think it was, like, essential, honestly. And it cut out a lot of, like, the saving you had to do in SMT4. Like, you would have to save constantly in that game. Before bosses and things like that. In this game, you don't really have to. You can just kind of go at your own pace. But I actually kind of like that. But that's going to be a divisive feature for some, I think. But yeah, this final dungeon was fucking horrible. Like, it was nightmarish. Like, so, like, this entire epilogue section of the game I hated. The story went to some kind of interesting places, but it was padded as shit. It was not fun, and the game's difficulty it was just absurd. It was just absolutely absurd. So, this epilogue section of the game really dragged the game down for me, and I would not recommend going for this path, which sucks because it's the true ending. Like, this is the true intended ending of the game, and it's really frustrating that they made it such a pain in the ass to get. It really sucks. Like, I would only recommend going for that ending if you're a masochist. Like, it was just, it is fucking ridiculous. But, yeah, I think that's about it. I've talked a lot about this game now, but, yeah, I enjoyed it overall. I think I enjoyed it more than I disliked it. But I can't say I would recommend it for people that didn't love SMT4. I think only SMT4 fans are going to really like this. And if you love the old school SMT games with the super maze-like dungeons and the brutal difficulty, then fine, go for it. You might actually really dig this, but I don't know. I don't understand. Like, I don't understand mazes in general. Like, why do games always have mazes? Like, they're never fun. But yeah, that's SMT4 Apocalypse. But yeah, that's it. What the games I've been playing. As far as other games, I'm going to start Paper Mario Color Splash here on the Wii U, and obviously Final Fantasy 15 we've got coming up soon that I'm going to play. Maybe The Last Guardian in December. But yeah, what have you guys been playing? Have you played any of these games? What do you think of them? And I'll see you next time.